Jim Harbaugh with some bold statements talking to The Athletic the other day, or at Big Ten Media Day. But some people took this as poking the bear. People like to get mad at things Jim Harbaugh says, but he says he thinks they're going to have 20 NFL draft picks next spring. That would smash Georgia's record of 15 in 2022. He listed all the guys: J.J. McCarthy, Donovan Edwards, Blake Corum, 5, 6, or 7 offensive linemen, pretty much the guys that Jim Nagy talked about. Bunch of guys on defense. He also said, a few guys maybe will come back. And I think that's an important piece of this. You're probably not going to lose everybody, but your thoughts on that comment? And I will say, it's very bold. They're not going to have 20. I would not predict that. But, I remember writing that article right when the NFL draft ended, looking ahead at 2024, and I had 15 legit candidates and 6 other guys that are on the radar. Now you add in Josh Wallace to that mix, who I think is going to be teetering right there as a late round type of guy, potentially undrafted. So individually, there are over 20 guys that have a chance to get picked. You're going to get some guys that fall out of the 7 rounds. They'll go undrafted. You're going to get some guys that come back to Michigan for another year or transfer or something like that. But it's not the craziest statement ever, even though it is very bold, and it would be absolutely wild to see one school have 20 guys picked. And it's probably not going to happen.
If I had to set the over-under for draft picks, purely draft picks, I think I would set it at 14.5. I think that I'm comfortable with that.
That's wild.
They have it is crazy, but they have guys at every position group that I think could be pros. The distinction is that Georgia that one year had 6 or 7 first-round picks. It's not that same caliber of talent, but if we're sitting here this time next year, getting ready for fall camp, and there are 17, 18, 19 players from this team that are in NFL camps, I can't say that would surprise me. I'm not ready to say that J.J. McCarthy is going to the NFL. I'm not ready to say that Junior Colson would go, or Rod Moore would go. But of guys that could go, that number could get there. And so much of this, so much of what your ceiling is in today's college football is, do you have NFL players on your roster? And from a purely pro scouting perspective, I think that Michigan has, they probably have somewhere in the high teens of guys that will be looked at. I mean, Jim Nagy, if they have their way at the Senior Bowl, they'll have 7 of these offensive linemen down there. So we'll see what happens there. I'll call it what it is. It's probably hyperbole, a bit of hyperbole right now from Mr. Jim Harbaugh, who is I think he means to that. I know that he means it. I know that there's one thing that you can always be confident about with Jim Harbaugh, is that he says what he means. He has convictions about the things that he says. And listen, if he finds a way to put out that level, that amount of guys into one draft, forget what happens on the field. That might be his best coaching and talent development job ever, right? That's insane. But I think that it's not up. The craziest thing about the statement is that it's not really outlandish if you know this roster.
And I think so. That's a great segue, because I want to take that comment and kind of talk more about Michigan's roster and the talent level that's on this roster. And that's kind of where it becomes impressive. It becomes very apparent that this Michigan coaching staff has done an incredible job developing these guys, that these guys have put in the work too. We mentioned Ben Herbert earlier, and even Abigail O'Connor too, the nutritionist. That plays a big part in this as well. I feel like Ben Herbert gets talked about in every media setting that any of these players talk in anymore. Either the media brings it up or they bring it up, because he's such an important piece of this. But they've done a great job with player development. They've gotten guys to stick around. Cornelius Johnson, using his COVID year. Michael Barrett using his COVID year. Zach Zinter should probably be in the NFL right now. He decides to come back. Trevor Keegan using his 5th year, despite having been an absolute lock to be picked this past spring. You could go on and on with some of these guys. So now you look at this. So blue chip ratio is the percentage of players on a roster that were 4 or 5 stars in high school. And basically Bud Elliott, who studies this stuff, says every national champion since whatever, I think it's going back about 20 years, really in the recruiting era, has been over 50% there. Michigan is sitting at 54. Now that's on the lower end of where these guys, of where, you need to be. Like national champions are usually 70, 80. There's some teams this year that are 90. I think Alabama's up at 90. So yes, they're in that range, but they're on the lower end. But then as Bruce Feldman points out in his piece, Michigan only has 3 or 4 starters that aren't blue chips. He actually included Zach Zinter as one. I think a couple of the services had him as a 4. So you could say it's just a couple guys. So your blue chip ratio of the guys that are actually going to be on the field, pretty high. You don't have as many 5 stars, but they've developed well. They're an old team. They're an experienced team. So 54% blue chip ratio. That's 36% behind Alabama, 31% behind Ohio State, and 23% behind Georgia. It's comparable to 4 teams that have won the national championship since 2010. Auburn in 2010, they were right at that 50-50 mark. They also had Cam Newton, one of the best college football players of all time. Florida State in 2013 had a 53% blue chip ratio. Clemson in 2016, 52% blue chip ratio. 2019 LSU, I think, was right at 54, where Michigan is at, and they really hit on some guys that developed. Justin Jefferson was a 2-star coming out of high school. But what do those 4 teams have in common? Generational quarterbacks. Cam Newton, as we mentioned, Jameis Winston for Florida State, Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson. I think that was his year in 2016. And then in 2019, Joe Burrow, LSU, might be also one of the best college football players or had one of the best seasons of all time. So it's unscientific because there's so much that goes into it. So much changes from when they're recruits. And for Michigan, it's been mostly for the better. But when you look at these rosters around the country, AB, how do you stack up Michigan at this point? They're not in that 90% range like Alabama of blue chips, but it feels like right now they're close, at least close. And maybe an edge here, an edge there, an X factor like JJ McCarthy could put them over the top and see them win one of these games.
Well, there's a couple other factors too. One, yes, you're right. They haven't recruited at the level of, the Alabamas, the Ohio States, the Georgias, and that bears true when you look at the rankings. There are 2 things to where I would say are a bit of an equalizer. One, I think you nailed it. It's the quarterback position. I mean, in this sport right now, if you don't have an elite quarterback, you don't have a shot. Michigan has maybe the most talented quarterback that it's ever had. I have no issue saying that at all. So you've got that plus, Michigan brought in 9 guys via the transfer portal. Most of them are gonna fill starting roles or roles on the 2 deep. That helps. I don't think that goes, that is accounted for in that ratio. But yeah, I mean, Michigan and the other thing here is that, there's a lot of griping and hand wringing on the board about, bringing in, not recruiting at a higher level. And I like this 2024 class that they've brought in. But you gotta this measure of it, the blue chip ratio or whatever you want to call it, that it's not, it's not sitting here predicting who's going to win, but that's the caliber of talent you need to win a national title.
It's showing who has a chance.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. And, over the years, I think Clemson's around 70, 71%, whatever it is. Over the years, Michigan and Clemson have kind of recruited on a similar clip. Clemson obviously has been bolstered the last few years, but it's that quarterback position. It's having the guy that, and you look at those teams at the top, Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia. I have no issue putting Michigan's quarterback situation ahead of all of them. And like I said, I think that's something that kind of keeps them in the conversation. At the end of the day, I care. I don't want to say I don't care about who you sign, but I care about who you develop. And, a lot of those guys, recruiting is still lotto tickets. And Michigan, I think, does as good a job as any program in the country in finding, maybe a traits-based guy that maybe is more of a fit for them, in that low 4-star, high 3-star range, and turning those guys into foundational players. So I think that's an equalizer for them as well. But obviously, like in the here and now, continuing to bring in blue chip talent, regardless of how well Michigan's developed these 3-star caliber guys. J.J. McCarthy was a borderline 5-star. Blake Corum was a borderline 5-star. I think Donovan Edwards was either a 5-star or a borderline 5-star. So your best players, for the most part, are guys that would fit into this criteria. So you do need that star power at the top for sure. So yeah, I it's good that they sit in there. They don't sit in this thing very comfortably compared to maybe where they have in previous years, but that's another box that gets checked, and like I said, that's going to continue to be critical as they build these rosters for post 2023.
Yeah, and it's kind of the way it's framed with blue chip ratio is these are the 15 teams that can win a national championship, and basically everyone else is out of luck. It's not impossible to win it, but every team that has won it has pretty much hit that criteria. And Clemson is a great example. It's actually very similar to something I wrote in a column in the Football Preview magazine. You can buy that at the MDen right now, mden.com, MDen in store. But I was kind of comparing to Clemson. So Michigan from 2019 to 2023, their average recruiting class rank was 10.6 in the country. In 2016, in those 5 cycles preceding that, Clemson was at 14.6. They win the national title that year. And then in 2018, the rolling average there, 10.8. So they're right in that range. But again, the difference is the quarterback. And we've talked about it, but if J.J. McCarthy raises his game to first-round pick type of level, I don't think you need to be Cam Newton. But if he's in that level and you have Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards in the offensive line and that defense and some other guys rise up too, then you're looking at a team that I think can compete with some of those teams on those big stages. And I will say, I think the talent gap has even significantly closed since December 31, 2021, when they got ran by Georgia. Not only does Georgia not have a generational defense, I think it's going to be damn good. And apparently they're faster and better than last season on defense. But Michigan has significantly closed that gap. And a lot of the guys that were playing big roles in that game, including J.J. McCarthy, who came in and was really the quarterback there in the second half, are now Michigan's upperclassmen, leaders, players that are using that experience in bringing it towards this season. So that's important to note as well. I think that gap has closed a little bit, but we shall see what happens. But I thought that was great stuff by Bruce Feldman over there. So, go check that out if you haven't. Last thing, go ahead, AB. Yeah.
Just one final thought. This just popped in my head. The blue chip ratio to me is the football version of when we cite the the Ken Pom top 15 offense, top 25 defense. One of those teams is winning a national title.
Right.
That's, to me, it's the same thing.
No doubt. It definitely is, where it doesn't totally disqualify you, but you kind of end up being there if you win the national title.